Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Confronting the Challenges Unique to Cannabis Manufacturing with HBK Cannabis Solutions. Before we begin, let's review a few housekeeping items. First, at the bottom of your screen are multiple tools you can use. All the engagement tools are resizable and movable, so you're welcome to move them around to get the most out of your monitor space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A engagement tool. We will answer these during the webcast, but if we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Additional materials are available in the Related Content tool. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you may find helpful. For the best viewing experience, we suggest closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background that could cause issues. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues in the Help tool at the bottom of your screen. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we appreciate providing feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chris.
Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to first of all thank Warren Harasz with Cannaspire for joining me this morning. Warren, I always enjoy talking with you. It's always a pleasure to be here and to discuss what we're seeing in the industry. So thank you very much for joining this morning. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're most welcome, Chris. Likewise, we always have such stimulating conversations just because we're both so passionate and spend so much time working with people actually doing this in their daily lives. So looking forward.
Absolutely. Today we're going to talk about really the manufacturing component of the cannabis industry. We talked a little bit last time about cultivation, and I think looking towards the future, I really believe that manufacturing is going to be a huge part of where this industry goes, and it's really seems to be driving innovation right now. I was kind of joking, Warren, the last time we talked, it's almost like if you buy a TV or a computer, starting 10, 15 years ago, within a year, it's already obsolete. I feel sometimes in the cannabis industry, we're seeing that with a lot of our product mixes and just generally what's available to the public. So just kind of the state of the industry when it comes to manufacturing, what are we kind of seeing now, and where do we think this is going in the next 5 to 10 years? With your background coming from very mature markets and also working in less mature markets, what are you kind of seeing out there, and where do you think this is heading?
So it's always a slow process, right? Like, especially here in Florida, where both you and I are, you've seen it as it develops. It kind of starts with the low-hanging fruit of CO2 extracts, maybe some distillate, maybe some hydrocarbon extracts, but really it took time to get the live rosin, the live resin, and the diamonds and sauces. And even now, the price is still very high and the quality's not fully there yet. So, I would say it's almost that same, trend almost in every market, state by state. And then it just sort of depends how developed the market is at that point. Obviously, California, Colorado, you can find, top of the line live rosins, top of the line live resins and extracts, and probably even some formulations, right? Like the high terpene, full spectrum extracts and neat things that really we don't have in these less developed markets yet. So, it really starts with the easy to produce ones with lower quality. And then of course, the market demands to see what these other places have, and it's getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I really have noticed when you go to more mature markets, like say California, is that the traditional thought process of extracting and producing distillate is kind of a lost art out there, in the sense that there's these massive conglomerates and manufacturers that produce it. It's cheaper just to go buy it. And I don't think that a lot of the other markets have seen this. When you go state to state, you can't sell across state lines. If there's no producers and manufacturers in the state that are that massive, you're going to have to produce your own. But how much does that state to state variation change what you're seeing right now?
I mean, I would say markets like Colorado and California, they're the leaders, right? And pretty much that's going to be where the rest of the nation heads. So the original idea was that we want in-house distillation. I don't want a single molecule of THC that I am growing to escape me. But then you start looking at cost, right? These distillate kits, it's probably $20,000 to $40,000 for even a simple small setup. Then there's the labor involved. Then there's testing. Then there's storage of the ethanol, which is a risk and a hazard. There's all these compliance things that come with it. Whereas nowadays there are giant operators who could take it for a toll and sell it back to you for pennies on the dollar. So why do you need to spend $50,000 to $100,000 plus labor costs when you could get it produced, get it right back in a very timely manner, and not really have to deal with the stress?
Right. Absolutely. And, another thing kind of from state to state that you kind of hit on here a little bit when it comes to, all the safety protocols that surround this. If you go into a mature market like California, the regulators have been dealing with this for a very long time. So they understand the industry. When you come into some of the newer markets, you're likely, if not 100% of the time, going to know more about the process than the actual regulators. So I've got to think that's another barrier to entry, and also maybe a longer education process for the local regulatory community.
I mean, you're right on the money that it really is a local scene, right? So for instance, in Hawaii, that fire department had never heard of hydrocarbon extraction being done. They were very wary of it because of the reputation that it had from the mainland of houses blowing up and, people getting hurt and loss of property. So really the way that they had to do it was a staged approach, right? Start with cold water extracts and rosin, move into distillate, show that you can handle the ethanol, show that you can keep a clean lab going, and then build out modular hydrocarbon and start doing it. But it's an educational process. And if at any point that fire department feels uncomfortable, you're just not going to get licensed to get going. So, you're right on the money that places like Colorado, California, they've already seen all of that stuff work. They know, just give me the ASME specs. We're good to go.
One of the things that we've really tried to work with to sort of educate our clients to prepare for, and I think some people are probably further along regardless of what market they're in, but to your point, it is a local scene, and there's so much chaos that comes with this industry day to day. It consumes tremendous amounts of your time as an operator. They're just operating in your local market is very stressful, very time consuming and challenging. So I think sometimes people don't really see what's going on outside of their market and what's possibly likely to come once the federal government moves on descheduling cannabis. I wonder how far behind some of these markets fall. I'll give you an example. When Florida first came online with their medicinal program, I will tell you that nobody really in Florida had ever heard of CO2 extracts, really. Like vape cartridges were not something that people here really knew much about. However, they had been around out in Colorado and California for a very long time. In fact, they were probably considered obsolete before they were even considered cutting edge in other states. So, do you think that's something when you talk to operators in states that are more restrictive and a little bit further behind the curve, that they're really not prepared for what could potentially happen on a wholesale level if interstate commerce opens?
I mean, I would say the biggest hurdle is GMP. So all of these big operators, they're going to be ready. They're already doing practices that are really, really darn close to GMP. Currently, no one does it because it's a huge expense at the federal level to have to go through. So why bother? But seriously, the problem is you're going to have a bunch of small operators at the local level that are going to get their lunch eaten by Colorado and California because they just have giant labs, high efficiency, and now they can ship in all of the product. I will say there will probably be a local market on the East Coast to not have to ship all of your stuff all the way across the country.
Right.
But again, those first movers to build big, they're going to win the lion's share because they can do everything affordably.
Absolutely. And, You're just kind of thinking moving forward. When we look at a lot of now what I think the products that people really are interested in, like live rosin, for example, in my understanding is that it's a very labor intensive process. It's time consuming. It takes manual labor to make it. I'm curious to see what types of innovations we're going to see to sort of streamline some of that and how effective it's going to be moving forward. Because I feel like every time I turn around and I think I know the technology, somebody does something new. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And in hash making, we have a saying, right? Quality in, quality out, garbage in, garbage out, right? So ultimately, with the rosin making, you can only produce rosin as well as those flowers were grown. And you could have a really great flower that's 25% THC, and for whatever reason, it does not want to wash into rosin. It's a physical characteristic of the plant, right? Now, certain manufacturers have become wise to this, and they will give their operators specific genetics, like, here, run this. I know that when I wash it into hash, I'll get 12% or more. But there's a whole R&D process that these cultivators are basically going through to try and find the good manufactured, that has the terpene profile, that meets the yield, and then also washes and presses into rosin in the right kind of way. Not every strain's going to do that, and not every cultivator is going to spend the time or waste the money. I had a friend in Southern California. He's a micro business operator. He says he lost almost $100,000 in testing genetics and phenotype hunting to find the right one that will wash and press into rosin. But that's the level of care it's going to take for these boutique farmers to outcompete and provide something that the big manufacturers can't.
Do you think so? It sounds like that's largely going to be driven by the cultivators themselves, the genetic component. And it seems like the push to this point has been high THC flower. The genetics are designed for high quality flower, high potency flower. Do you think that it's worthwhile for the cultivators, or do you think it's on their radar to start looking for better manufacturing genetics versus flower?
The smart ones are already onto this, right? I would say there are definitely certain cultivators and seed companies that are known for producing better extracting. For instance, TGA Subcool, right? He was a cultivator for many years, may he rest in peace. But his seed brand was known for producing hash, right? So what else I would say is the spread of cannabinoids. So terpene profiles. Look, we're talking about distillate. THC is cheap. I can get it from trim and floor sweepings and distill it all the way up to 96% and then throw it in an oven and isolate it and have 99% THC crystals, right? It's not that far off before we could produce it in a lab by taking hemp biomass and transforming the CBD into THC. We're already seeing it. So really, THC is easy. That it's going to be the terpene profiles and those rare cannabinoids. And so you're going to start to see more organic cultivation, more innovative or, biodynamic cultivation techniques to try and preserve a better flavor of the product. And I mean, look, those cultivators are going to take a loss. They're going to have pests. They're going to lose on yield. It's going to take more labor in order to enforce and to uphold these standards. And ultimately, the manufacturers that want to distinguish themselves are going to have to be willing to pay a little bit more to get that product.
Absolutely. And kind of segueing into one of the next things that we were sort of discussing is the edible market. I feel like this is probably, it's a huge opportunity. It seems to be the most accessible product type for a newer or more novice consumer of cannabis. However, as we all know, there's a lot that can come along with that if you don't really know what edibles are going to do to you personally when you take them. But I still do think that this is going to continue to be a big deal. Do you kind of agree? And do you think the consumer demand for edibles is going to continue to rise?
Absolutely. I mean, you already see Delta 8 and Delta 9 hemp-derived gummies in gas stations all the way across America right now. So this is like, we've already got light decriminalization of edibles for pretty much anyone 21 and over that can walk into a gas station. So we know it's coming. I do think that big manufacturers are probably going to dominate the scene, especially right at the beginning. But there's so much room for innovation. I mean, you see like the Bong Appetit culture, right? That's like a Vice TV series where they do gourmet edible dinners with cannabis. Action Bronson, the rapper, is into the gourmet edible scene. So this is where I see small operators, look, once all the cookies and Rice Krispie treats and sugary sweets have been made by the big operators, there's going to be room for something special. Hot sauce, beef jerky, or something I haven't even thought of, right? Like, I think you and I were talking about the sodas recently and just how cool the drinks were, and they hit you very quickly. And seriously, it's going to become a major alternative to alcohol very soon. So
I completely agree with you. And I've noticed, you can always, break down the sales and how many people consume edibles versus other types of products. But when I look at a state like Pennsylvania that doesn't allow edibles, I think it's really been tough on their cannabis industry. And I think we're seeing it right now in Pennsylvania, just how tough it's been. Your distillate is now significantly less valuable. The demand for flower isn't there, it's not congruent to the supply. So you're seeing, downward pressure on price. It's a medicinal market. And I think that's probably one of the components that if they were allowed to go to market with edibles, it may really give a boost to those operators in PA. But it seems like there's still a fear. I know that, the traditional fear has been when you let edibles go to market, what does that do? How much is it targeting children? Is there confusion about what you're really getting? I remember before we were more regulated, you would see edibles that were basically branded the same as like a Snickers bar with just one letter changed. Like if you really didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't have known what you were getting. So maybe that's some of the fear. But are you seeing in any of the markets that you're in that currently don't allow them? Is there some talk towards easing those regulations and giving these companies an opportunity to be a little more profitable?
So in Hawaii, when we first got up and running, they weren't allowing edibles. And of course, about 18 months, maybe it was 2 years, right? That finally got removed. And it was because of the medical claims, right? Like you're saying, this is medical. Well, not everyone can smoke it, vaporize it. Sometimes the topical is not a deep enough relief for somebody with cancer that, is dealing with, nausea or, appetite issues. So really the edible is one of the best ways to medicate. It's also one of the easiest on the body in terms of, what it's doing to you in terms of your health. So it's just one of those things where you see that it's generally going to come in. And we know that in New Jersey, it's banned too. It's coming, and as a regulatory compliance officer, my job is to sit and watch those regs and be ready for all of these dispensaries and producers to pivot immediately. Have the SOPs ready, have your coolers ready, know what your packaging and labeling requirements are. And be ready for allergy reporting and all of that stuff too, because I know we've mentioned this before, but currently the FDA is not in the edible game. So if somebody dies from a peanut allergy from a medical cannabis edible that they bought in their state, there's not any kind of real legal recourse other than currently the industry has been doing its best to follow these practices. So that's a whole other sticky wicket as soon as the feds come in, right?
Right. And it is funny because, regulation, there's always pros and cons. And I do think to a certain degree with the FDA, there's a little bit of a missed opportunity here. And to me, CBD and Delta 8 are the prime example. I would be terrified to consume a lot of those products where they're sold because you really have no idea what you're actually getting. There's no oversight. I think that the actual licensed operators are probably a little tighter because they're already going through lab testing and things like that. But if I understand that correctly, that's more for the actual, cannabis component of what they're selling versus just the general ingredients and what they mean for your health. Like to your point, allergies or just, what types of chemicals are being used in producing some of these, candies and gummies and different products that are out there.
I've heard some horror stories from the hemp industry where they've been using myclobutanil, which is also known as Eagle 20. It is a highly, highly toxic pesticide, okay? Now, you can use this on apples because you can rinse the skin of the apple, and as long as you rinse your apple, it's safe. You're not going to get poisoned from myclobutanil. Hemp, on the other hand, is a bud. It absorbs everything. So one tiny drop of this stuff gets on any of that product, well, then you're, lighting it on fire and consuming it. When you burn myclobutanil, it turns into hydrogen cyanide and basically is a poison for your body. And I've talked to other regulators from established markets like Colorado. I mean, look, some of this hemp and CBD biomass, isolate, distillate, it's being produced in non-GMP countries. So overseas, the Philippines, other places to where who knows what pesticide they're spraying it with, who knows what heavy metals were in that at the time of harvest. So, I mean, we're going to see at some point the FDA has to get into it, right?
Right.
It's only a matter of time before somebody gets sick.
I think you're right. And I think a lot of the better operators almost welcome it because, it seems like the industry has actually been sort of, for lack of a better term, policing itself pretty well in using clean manufacturing processes, because we haven't seen a tremendous number of high profile cases of poisoning or people getting sick, which is kind of surprising with the lack of regulation. So I would think that a lot of these companies that are doing the right things benefit maybe from a little more oversight on those who aren't. But it's probably, my guess is that's not going to happen anytime soon. As long as, cannabis remains Schedule 1, my suspicion is the FDA will continue to kind of sit on the sidelines. You kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, look, it could literally change any time, right? We've been seeing a lot of bills go through Congress. They're trying to pass safe banking. They're trying to do a lot. What I will say is it's probably a testament to how safe cannabis and hemp really are, right? That like it almost is impossible to kill you. I've definitely heard some stories about like mold exposure and mycotoxins causing people to get sick, but they're really isolated and they're very, very rare, right? So I think this is where, we should have the FDA and the banks involved because it's so safe. No one's dying, so.
Right. In the drinks, I think those are going to lag behind too. We still don't have them here in Florida. I would assume that they're kind of the last one to come to market because what I've learned from talking with operators in markets that allow them, they're so fast acting that those tend to be the ones where people overdo it. They think they're having a serious health issue and they end up in the emergency room when there's really, nothing more they can do but just wait and it'll eventually go away. But they feel like they're going to have a heart attack. And, that's where I've maybe seen the more high profile cases of people ending up in ERs or, inexperienced cannabis users not really knowing what they're getting into. They drink a whole drink when they should have drank 10% of it.
So years of working in a dispensary, when you get those calls, put on the Bob Marley, get yourself a warm bath going and get some food and immediately dilute, right? But you're not wrong. There is a major risk, especially, with somebody mixing that with alcohol. Like I do wonder what the future of, DUI or driving under the influence with those types of drinks on board could actually look like. But that being said, the markets that they enter in, they are wildly in demand. So Lagunitas did sparkling water infused with terpenes, and this was being sold in my home county of Sonoma, where I used to live, shout out to Mercy Wellness for having it on their shelves first. But like, these are little 20 milligram drinks with terpenes infused and just the Lagunitas name on it, and they sold out as soon as they hit the shelves. You couldn't even get them. There was a line to pick it up. So there's definitely a demand. I do think regulation, that's a little bit cloudy in terms of like how many milligrams per bottle, how many can you buy in one sitting? Like, can I get just 100 of them, or am I limited to a 6-pack a day? Or, and labeling, right? How are you going to label this in a way that's going to actually make it so that a kid's not going to just crack one open out of the cooler and then you're in the ER with Junior because they're freaking out. So,
right. And to your point earlier, I do think those are probably, if there was any product that the alcohol industry was either going to lobby against or try to get control over, it's going to be those drinks. Because I do believe that's probably the biggest threat to just the general social drinking culture that we just generally have as a country.
We really do. And there are so many people that if they could replace that 6-pack they've been drinking at night with something else that gives them the same feeling, they get to hold the can and sit there and watch the football game, that they don't feel the social pressure of not consuming alcohol because they're sitting there with their friends who are all consuming at the same time. I think there is a general cultural desire to see it happen. So yeah, I think alcohol is definitely not going to be a fan of that one and will lobby against it. But to some extent, you see Corona trying to get into the cannabis game. So there's sort of a, if you can't beat them, join them. And I mean, Budweiser's mascot is the Clydesdale because that's what they used to use to smuggle their beer during Prohibition. So we're
right.
all trying to make it out of Prohibition into the market, right?
Right. And, kind of talking about all these things, it's it really makes it challenging to, you travel state to state, you meet with people in different states, you try to advise them and consult with them and help them figure out how to go to market as a manufacturer. And all of these things make it so difficult. For example, like for me, one of the things, we talked earlier, a lot of times in a really immature market, CO2 is a good entry point. But you have to do it with the understanding that that's probably on borrowed time. This is not going to be a long-term business model for you. And I think there's still a lot of people that just don't understand things like that, and trying to advise them on, how to go to market, what you need to plan for, what equipment you need to buy is increasingly difficult. What types of things are you just seeing? I know you work in a lot of different markets in terms of just going to market, barriers to entry, compliance, regulation, just overall.
So I see a lot of people trying to go really big because, and I think it's almost a marketing thing from the extraction companies to where they get scared that, if you go too small and there's high demand for your product, you're going to be missing all of that money and you can't produce at that level. Well, if you buy a giant extraction setup, you got to keep it filled with product, right? And you have to have the labor to be able to run it. So this almost, gets to a point where you've got to be able to handle massive batches at once. It's not maybe the most productive when you're just figuring out what your product offerings are. And I always say start small and expand out. You could always just buy another extraction room of the same size and double up because, hey, your product's so in demand, you're making money. Let's spend it and get the rest of that market share. But it definitely can hurt you to try to set up big, and then you've got such a big extraction rig that you're waiting for flower to arrive just so that you can fill it up and get to work.
That's such a great point. I think we've seen it on both ends of the economic process of the manufacturing, whether it's the inputs or the sale of the outputs. For example, I remember, in 2018 and 19 when the hemp market was really on fire. Everybody that you came across was starting a hemp farm, and they grew massive hemp crops with nobody that was going to buy their hemp or CBD. that, if we do this, there's going to be a huge demand for it. And then we had people stuck with millions of dollars worth of biomass. Like there was just nowhere to go with it. And we've seen similar things in, for example, I think a state like Ohio, where they've separated the manufacturing and processing license from the cultivation license. The demand for extraction in Ohio was not as high, I think, as the number of licenses that they issued. So you have a lot of extractors who have idle time and are just looking for, work, essentially. And as you know, in this industry, when you're waiting and you're idle, you're losing money. The tax environment is absolutely adverse. Cash is always tight. To be idle when you have that kind of CapEx spend is brutal. Are you seeing a lot of that too, or do you think the operators are kind of getting wise to that risk?
I think it's all in flux. I think it depends on the market, because I see small operators in California that actually make it, but it's because they're putting such heart and soul into what they're doing. They're growing, beautiful organic indoor flower, taking that $100,000 loss that I mentioned, and then only pressing it into rosin, only making top shelf products with it, right? Not wasting any time trying to go to distillate or trying to run BHO. That being said, you have to be willing to put in that level of care and effort to have that top shelf product. You have to distinguish yourself, right? Distillate's cheap. Once it's distilled, 97% THC is the same from any kit that you get it from. And you can take terpenes out of, apples and bananas and mangoes. So it's really just about what do you have to offer that the market hasn't seen that they can't get elsewhere? Right. And this is where you could be the biggest farm in the world, and going big isn't going to really help your rosin setup, right? You need a small cold room with a dedicated operator that's ready to grind and work really, really hard. So there is a certain how good is your extract artist? How good is your buyer in terms of your sense of keeping your B2B connections with the right farms, with the right product? These are the things that set people apart, as opposed to the big operators that are just going to go, we do toll processing. Bring us whatever you've got. We'll turn it into whatever you get. We hope you like it. Right. It's going to be a little less care and a little less quality, but they can do it affordably.
Right. Well, and we're seeing the same thing when we go to a market like California and we're dealing with more of a boutique manufacturer. None of the companies we work with out there are making their own distillate at this point. It's cheaper to just buy it. There's big, huge manufacturers. That's all they do. So, they focus on, if they're like an edibles manufacturer, they're focused on the quality of their actual product. They're just buying their distillate. And then the other ones are focused on the rosins, the live diamonds, the boutique solventless products that, I think what I perceive right now is maybe the market's not completely ready for them. They're a little pricier, and the consumer doesn't seem as discerning when it comes to extracts. But I think in the future, when you really just look at where we're going just in general, I do think people are becoming more health conscious about what they put into their body. And if you can have something that has been extracted only with ice water, why wouldn't you go for that over something where the solvent's been used?
I mean, aside from the fact that it tastes better and really has a better effect because it is more full spectrum, some more of that full plant medicine gets into it, it won't be 99.9% THC. It's going to be a lower THC percent, but you're going to get so many more terpenes that there's just infinitely more medicinal value to that, right? So also, I mean, I've been in the game for the longest time, and I used to hear horror stories about guys in their 40s living up in Mendocino and Humboldt who had COPD from too many poorly extracted dabs. Now, of course, that's from the black market days. Nowadays, we have testing standards. But still, a million dabs over the lifetime of a smoker, even with 0.01% residual butane or pentane, all of those burn into neurotoxic chemicals, right? So look, we used to say, oh, it's a hippie thing, environmental consciousness and health and all of this. It's really not. We're moving forward and we're seeing all of this stuff aggregate. So you've got a giant field, a tiny little bit of pesticide. It gets concentrated down into hash, then pressed. Suddenly you concentrate those bad things, the heavy metals and pesticides, into the oil, right? So it does pay to be health conscious, and I do think consumers are going to catch on, and also price will slowly start to catch up to where these products will come down in price to where it'll be a little more affordable.
How much of that has to be driven by innovation? Because like we talked about how labor intensive it is, so it's going to just, you're getting essentially what you pay for. It's harder to make, it's more time consuming. Maybe it's not even that it's harder to make, but it's more time consuming and costly to make, like a live rosin, right? So, how much will innovation be needed to bring that down? Or do you think there's ways now where the price points could potentially drop?
I mean, I think innovation is still there. Okay. So I think breeding, we're seeing plant genetics coming up with 30% plus THC now. That's something where even 5-6 years ago, that wasn't really happening in the genetics. I do think breeders can start breeding for things like hash production, trichromes that easily fall off the plant to create this live resin product that's so desirable. It's all been under prohibition, Chris. So we don't really even know what this plant is fully capable of, and we don't know what human idea or innovative technique hasn't been thought of yet, because BHO has been around for a while, but it's maybe 40 years old, 50 years old tops, right?
Right.
And then when you look at how far BHO has come from the backyard blast honey oil to, the beautiful golden shatters to live resin extraction, live resins maybe only a decade, maybe it's been around 10 years. So,
right.
I do see constant innovation in the process, constant breeding and genetic diversification. Hold on to your seats. We may not even know what the next thing is. And we're just starting to see this collaboration between pharmacists, biochemists, people with real education, with the people like me, the extract artists that have, the passion for the plant and really understand those qualities that we're looking for, to where, I might not know biochemistry, but I'm like a master brewsmith. You need somebody with a really great palate and a great understanding for what he's working with, the base ingredients, to produce a product that's good. So we're at the tip of the iceberg for innovation, I think, Chris. I think, the next 10 to 20 years could be really exciting.
I completely agree. And just kind of along the lines of manufacturing, we talked on the cultivation side about how important standard costing and, cost accounting, which, I will tell you, when I was in college getting my accounting degree, cost accounting was the most boring class. I thought I'd never use it. And now it's the number one thing that I do every single day. It's kind of funny how that's come full circle. But it's so important, these KPIs and to have standard costing in your SKUs. And I think this cultivation, people do struggle a little bit with this, but the manufacturing process is where we really see a disconnect between the understanding of the extract artists and the people that actually do the work, and then the people responsible for putting together the financial reporting. Are you seeing, with the companies you're working with, is this becoming more of a priority, or are we still kind of in a state where people don't understand how important this is until they really need it?
So it's a holdout from the underground days, right? To where the extract artist is a magician and he does something that no one else understands how to do. And giving up that knowledge is, you lose a certain degree of control, especially when in the old days as cultivators, we were the vertical license. We did it all. I grew it, I extracted it, I sold it, literally. So, there's this sense in which it's a forbidden knowledge and you don't want to just teach anyone how to do it. But as the knowledge is spreading, as techniques are opening up, you are starting to see companies having a much clearer sense for, hey, okay, it didn't come out beautiful on the first pass through the rotovap. What do we have to do to remediate this? How much ethanol are we actually going through? How much butane? How many rosin presses do I need sitting in the background? And how much do I need to pay that guy who knows how to take apart vacuum pumps, rosin presses? I'll tell you right now, that's your biggest problem is those vacuum pumps on those closed loop extraction kits. They go out all the time. And if you've got a guy that can sit there and break it down, that's time that you're not spending waiting for, Extract Depot or, whoever your company is to come through and service that pump for you or get a new one, right? So it really comes down to scale, but also just sort of like what you can do to make this process completely transparent, right? Write out your SOPs, get somebody to work with the extract artist and tease out of them, what's your actual process? What are you looking for QA, QC? Tell me what your flowers need to look like. Tell me what their test and certificate of analysis needs to look like. Get down to the nitty gritty and the granular. And that's where I would say it helps to hire a consultant, somebody like me that speaks facility and also writes SOPs that could help you hammer all of that out, get it systematized so that, look, if your guy's a great extractor and something happens to him one day and he doesn't show up to work, that's okay. You can hire somebody new and the process is still alive.
You're absolutely right. When we build cost accounting models for different operators, the biggest challenges we have is, number one, they leave out components of the process, whether it's raw material inputs, different things that happen throughout the process, which a lot of times in their mind are completely insignificant and immaterial. However, they change your direct labor, they change your overhead. I don't think anyone considers remediation, like if something doesn't go well the first time, how many times we have to redo it. And, for our team, you're generally dealing with cost accountants. We do understand cannabis, but we don't understand the extraction process the way the people doing it do. So a lot of times they'll leave a component out. We may not catch it right away. To your point, it's great to have someone who can, it's almost like a translator. Like you've got to, mediate between both sides to make sure everybody has what they need so that we can really get solid numbers. I don't think people always realize how important some of these KPIs that come out of cost accounting are. Number one, you never know what you should sell something for if you don't know what it cost you to make it. And that's usually the obvious one for people. And I think a lot of times, especially the smaller companies, they kind of think they have a feel for what things cost. But, when they haven't been operating on a larger scale, they don't understand some of their contribution margin and their overhead. So sometimes their costing is too low. The other thing that I've noticed with a lot of people that they don't understand is something that you hit on earlier, and this was something I didn't really understand for a long time, is how different yields can be based on genetics. And that can be dramatic. That can be a lot of money if you're using the wrong genetics to try to make your extracts. I got to think that that's something that I don't think a lot of people know or understand. And if you're not really tracking those yields, you'll never know. Just like if you're not tracking your standard cost, if you have me working in your extraction department and I'm inefficient, you won't be able to identify that I'm struggling without that standard costing system because you won't see the variances. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. A master extractor is going through his freezer and he's got 25 pounds and one of them's freezer burned and doesn't look good. He can't run it. So he pulls it out, he tracks it, but is that going into the cost of, hey, we only got 24 out of 25 pounds? And also, what do we need to do to fix our freezers or to fix our storage so that we're getting 25 out of 25? Or another good one is, it sat too long. These freezer times, you can't leave it in the freezer forever. You want to do this fresh to get the best terpenes out. And you go, well, we ran that batch. It sat in there for 5 days. It wasn't very flavorful. It didn't sell very well. The dispensary's coming back to us going, hey, we don't really like this live resin that you gave us. Well, you need to standardize that practice and make sure that you have the labor and the team to process through that stuff quickly, to keep it fresh, to keep your product marketable and good. So there are just so many variables, right? That I think you hit the nail on the head, Chris, that it might seem small to the operator. Oh, it's 1 pound and 25. Oh, it's 2 extra days in the freezer, instead of, it was 4 days instead of 2. No big deal. But if you were to standardize that, you could hit that quality mark every time. And you're not beholden to your master extractor that's just the magician behind the scene.
Right. And this is where we see the most headaches in trying to build a standard costing system is extraction. Usually, if we already are dealing with, we're buying distillate, or if we're looking at costing a product that starts with distillate, we generally have less of a challenge to get every component of the process. Whether it's manufacturing edibles, it seems like we're able to get that information more quickly. And I don't know if it's because maybe there's just variation in how people do things, or to your point earlier, I do feel sometimes like they're not being forthcoming because they don't want to tell me everything. Like there's a concern that there's some intellectual property here that could be exposed. So it seems like the extraction process is where we really usually have to roll up our sleeves and dig in to make sure we really understand everything that's happening.
Well, and it's like the brewsmith analogy that I used, right? So this master extractor is the brewsmith, right? And he wants that little bit of control to be able to go through the freezer and go, oh, this pound doesn't look good, I'm tossing it out. And by, writing all of that down, writing these standards, how he's deciding, how he's, that's giving away the secrets of how he knows, what the best to extract is and when it's ready and when to do everything. So there's definitely a little bit of hesitancy on the operator side to give that away, because you could technically get fired and they could hire somebody else for pennies on the dollar who now has your IP all written down. That being said, you have to look at the good of the company. And if you're really good and efficient at what you do, the company should love to have you on because you've developed all of their SOPs. And yeah, they could replace you, but no one's going to do it the way you did. And you gave them their IP. So there needs to be a little reciprocity there.
Right. And I think one thing that people who aren't in the industry don't really understand, because, anytime you work with anyone in the industry, they want an NDA signed. And it's in other industries, I've never had so many requests for NDAs. But what people don't understand is they really don't have any protection under federal law for their intellectual property. And so that's a huge barrier. If you think of anyone who ever invents something new, a new process, a new product, there's usually something that they can do to get some sort of federal protection. It's very limited for cannabis operators. And I don't think everybody's always as sensitive to that as a lot of the people who've been the thought leaders are.
Yeah, I mean, I've met extractors who had secret processes that they wouldn't tell you what they're doing. And, this is my special thing. We're trying to patent it. At this point, it's all been done. People have been extracting orange oil, mint oil, like you name it. Essential extracts have been getting done out of plants for, hundreds of years at this point, tinctures and all of that. So it's a balance between what is actually marketable and what actually makes sense with, trying to be this person that has something that's so privatized and so proprietary, right?
Right. And that's another thing that I don't think everybody understands is, to your point, this is not unique to cannabis. This has been used in, I believe, like in the vitamin industry for a very long time, right? Just, extractions from plants. It's not something that's specific to cannabis. It's just the application here is very important to the industry.
I mean, it's essential. Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Extraction on a whole it's going to only go up, right? Because we're going to see manufactured products expand. Transdermals, topicals, tinctures, edibles. And I do think there's some, inhalers or, there are other products that we haven't even seen that haven't hit the market yet.
Right.
That being said, it's still going to be a little bit art and a little bit science.
We've got about 10 minutes left, and I've got a couple questions actually here for you. The first one is multi-part, so I'll start with the first part. It says, Warren mentioned biodynamic growing techniques to enhance flower quality and character profile. Are biodynamic techniques being used in indoor growing?
So not that I really know of. Yeah, no, that's really mostly for sustaining outdoor farms.
And then what are some of the key best practices? New Jersey, for example, lists this in their regs as a sustainable practice.
Absolutely. So the reason why biodynamic and not organic is really just because in order to be organic, you have to go through the USDA, and that's a federal thing. I think there's like 1 or maybe 2 organic cannabis farms in all of America. One of them's in Washington State. I remember hearing about it back in my days in Hawaii. But so, yeah, to the point, why biodynamic? It keeps soil erosion to a minimum. It also only does organic amendments. So really, you're not going to be using any like harsh pesticides or harsh fertilizers that could create runoff or damage the farmland. So it definitely helps in terms of sustainability, because when the cannabis farm leaves, you could grow anything else on that property and it would be safe, and you're not going to damage local waterways.
And then this one is for you also. Why a warm bath if you overdo it?
Yeah, that's just one that I learned that in the dispensary. You know, like you get the call, what did you give my wife? You know, she thinks she's dying. We're sorry, sir. Please just put on the Bob Marley. Nice warm bath to calm her nerves, keep her, you know, help keep you relaxed and calm. And then, of course, eat food. Try to dilute that THC in your system as much as possible, and slow down the effects. So just take it mellow. Don't freak out there, folks.
I guess one last thing, you know, then if there's any more questions, we can take them, but just kind of came into my mind when we were talking about the organic grow practices and sustainability. When we were talking in the webinar about cultivation, we were talking about how important, you know, some of the environmental concerns become. For example, you know, a lot of states will push, they want you to use LED lights because they're more environmentally friendly, they would say. How much are you seeing now a push for the manufacturing process to be environmentally conscious? I mean, is there pushback against using things like solvents in markets, or is that really not something we're seeing at this point?
I mean, there's a big push on the waste, right? So they want to make sure that you're sealing up all of that, you know, butane and pentane exposed material and taking it to the correct waste facility. In terms of monitoring, it's not that well tracked, right?
Right.
And this is where I worry about the potential of people dumping solvents, you know, and those going into, the water table or, you know, any other area. But really, it's, you know, I do think that eventually, I think the MSDS side, they watch storage, right, to make sure that nothing's going to explode. Right. And I think there are little monitors and sensors, but in terms of like, where is it going? I think it's mostly just the cannabis waste, and there needs to be a little bit closer tracking on where the used solvent is actually going.
Right. And I think you made the point we were talking earlier this week, just even the waste from the biomass that's now soaked in butane. You know, where is that going to go? How do you dispose of that? What's the right way to get rid of just even those materials?
Yeah, they're volatile. So really, you have to seal them up. It has to be a special bag that's going to be able to handle the solvent, right? You can't just put it in any plastic bag that could potentially melt or could, you know, fill up with vapors. And then you have to seal it up for transport, because you can't just, you know, drive it and then your car gets all filled up with, you know, butane vapor and you go to, you know, some little static spark or something. It's dangerous. So it's really about having proper transport, being able to seal it. I I do think you can aerate it for a little while, but again, you're going to need fume hoods and you're going to need, proper ventilation for those areas. And then it's a security thing, right? You can't just leave it out in the back of the facility to air out, right? So
Right.
you need a secure access storage room. You need special bagging and special totes. And then you need like a good car, probably a van, because these are, 25 pounds isn't a small load, right? So
Right.
you're going to be driving to the dump probably a couple times a week if you're busy.
Right. Well, Michelle, Lori, I don't see any other questions here on our end. If you don't have any on yours, just want to really thank you, Warren, for taking the time. Always love talking with you. If you have any questions for me or for Warren or his teammates with Cannaspire, our contact information will be available. And we thank everyone for being here and for attending. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for having me. And folks, HBK, they're the best accountants in cannabis. They only deal with cannabis. Cannaspire uses them personally, so we're not only fans, but we're members of the HBK family. And reach out if you ever need any cannabis consulting. We write applications, handbooks, and SOPs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Warren.
Oh, you're most welcome, Chris. Look forward to talking again.
Take care.